Hello, good afternoon everybody. Thanks for finishing your lunch and taking your time to spend some time with me while I talk about the power of smart data integration. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name's Stephen de Launay. I am the Global Product Evangelist at Chevin Fleet Solutions. We're a fleet software company. We've been providing fleet management solutions to the industry for more than 30 years. So let's talk about the topic at hand. I have a quote here on the screen from Clive Humby, OBE and mathematician, quoting that data is the new oil. Well, I guess what he means by that is it's buried underground and it takes a team of people and specialist equipment to get it out. Oh no, it's valuable, but if it's unrefined it can't really be used. I think both of those things are actually true. So when we're talking about data, there is lots and lots of data available with your vehicles and your data providers. And the problem with this is it gives us the opportunity for data overload. Now, before we get into the topics, I just want to bring up this very, I'm not going to say scary, but very interesting statistic. We're talking about connected vehicles, and these can be OEM type connected vehicles or connected vehicles through a telematics provider such as our sponsors here, Geotab, or others in the market. What we can see here is research shows that a connected vehicle generates more than 25 gigabytes of data per hour. And that relates to 17 million pages of text. Now, when I read this, I was, for want of a better word, flabbergasted. Just think about the amount of data that's out there that is available from your data providers. The problem we've got here is, of course, data overload. Now, that's just taking one connected vehicle, 25 gigabytes per hour. Scale that out around your operation, the number of vehicles, the number of hours they're operating, the data quantity is vast. But let's not just think about connected vehicle data. There are significant other data points within your operation. Now, I've got a few listed on screen here. We can think about the vehicle data, that's a given. We can think about fuel transactional data. This is data that's held by your fuel card company or your fuel dispenser company. We can think about data relating to accidents. Now, this could be from your onboard tracking systems, it could be from your driver cameras, but also could just be from an accident management company or third party there. Your maintenance data, now this can come from your internal workshops, your internal references, or maintenance providers and things like the Epix OneLink system. There is data out there relevant to your jobs and your maintenance processes. Looking at pinpoint location information. Now, this is gathered from, again, largely telematics and onboard devices, but this could also be driver-led location data from mobile apps and devices carried by the driver when they're doing their basic daily operations. Thinking about the drivers themselves, the drivers will have information relevant to them as an operator. So do they have a relevant and valid driving license, a CPC certificate? Is their tacho code up to date? The information through there. So lots of information relevant to the driver, including things like the training programs and courses they may have been on. Looking at regulatory and governmental information, so data from the DVLA, the DVSA, the government. So is the vehicle MOT'd? Is it taxed? Is it insured? This information, again, are data points that exist out there in the market. Trips data, again, largely tied into your telematics provider. Where is the vehicle going? How fast is it going? That information again, and ties into the operational, the work, the jobs, the trips that those vehicles are doing. And there's also financial data. Think about the information you get from your leasing companies or indeed your internal financial systems. So this is the kind of scope of data that we're talking about here, not an individual data point from a telematics vendor, but the breadth of information that you can actually get from your suppliers and your IT infrastructure. So thinking about data overload. Now, what does this cause? What problems does data overload cause? The first thing we've got is missed opportunities. Now, if we have got lots of data, it's arguably lots of noise. And if the systems are unconnected, you will be missing opportunities. Opportunities to save money, opportunities to save time, opportunities to do better. So if we've got single data points and nothing's joined up, we're going to miss opportunities for that. Unconnected systems, which again here is the topic of our conversation, making sure that these things are connected. So if supplier A is supplying you with a small portion of data in a silo, that's all you can manage and monitor. We need to think about how to connect these things together. Increased time and cost. So if we imagine we've got 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 different unconnected systems, the amount of time it takes you to log into them, run the reports, have the information, to then move to another system to look at other reports without them being connected costs you a significant amount of time, and as we know, time equals money. So onto the onto the topic of this. What can we do with this vast array of information that's available out there? The first thing we need to think about is having a single source of truth. Now, as I mentioned at the start, I work for a fleet management software company, so I would always suggest that having a good, robust fleet management platform is fundamental to this data capturing and monitoring exercise. So again, if we think about the different solutions out there, in silos, very difficult to manage. Having a single source solution to leverage that data and accumulate it and manage it is the perfect way to start. The second thing we need to focus on is managing by exception. Again, there is so much data out there. If you just turned on any integration with any telematics provider or any data provider you've got, you'll be inundated with information and you'll get blinded by this. You'll get deafened by the noise and you won't be able to see what I'm calling here the needles in those haystacks. So when we're talking about managing this information, be quite specific about the topic that you want to cover off, the problem you're trying to solve, the information you're trying to pinpoint. Excuse me. So pick, again, the needles, not the haystacks. The third thing here is automating and standardizing. So when I talk about automation, I'm old enough to remember when systems used to be disconnected. The internet didn't exist when I first started working at Chevin. So a lot of the data was in silos. You would get a floppy disk from a fuel card company or a maintenance provider. You'd have to load this information into the tool. Nowadays, that journey is very, very different. Almost all data providers now will have some kind of API architecture. So make sure that the automation piece is set up to connect to your distinct and individual data sources and pull that information automatically into your solution. So instead of you having to do any legwork, let's set up and manage that process to again save yourself time in that sort of process. The automation piece would also, I'll talk about this a little later in the presentation, managing this automation, managing those exceptions, and indeed generating the exception analysis and reports is all about saving time in that process. The other thing we do need to consider whenever we're talking about this data points is standardization. If you take two different vehicle manufacturers, I can almost guarantee that they'll have different API architecture. The data points will be different. It'll be covering the same topics, but they would have different fault codes and report codes. Equally, if we were importing fuel transaction information, for example, the information you get from Esso might have a different fuel code to the information you get from Shell. So making sure that we're standardizing that data. Diesel wants to be transacted as diesel wherever it comes from. An engine oil warning light wants to be the same wherever it comes from. If we don't have that standardization process, we won't be able to effectively highlight the exceptions that we're looking to break down onto. And using the right tools. Now, this is super important, and I keep going back to the fact that I'm a fleet software provider. It is important to have a really good, robust system in place to manage this information. Also, to make sure that the vendors you're engaging with have access to that data to give you the information you need to manage the process. This could also be pushed out to mobile applications. So, for example, job allocation, vehicle walk-around check management, technician control. Having the right systems in place, both automatic, plugged into the vehicle, or manual, mobile apps, for example, or integrations from an old-fashioned file transfer or a floppy disk import. Make sure you have the right tools in place to manage the data that you're importing here. So let's think about solving the puzzle of making the best of this disconnected data. Now, I've got a few highlight points here, and I'm going to start off with the first one. So it says here odometer. Regardless of the 64,000 different data points you might have from your telematics provider, regardless of everything else you've got, if we think about an odometer, it's a fundamental task for good fleet management. If you have a good odometer reading, everything else works and sings nicely. A bad odometer, of course, is just as problematic. A bad odometer triggers a bad MPG, it triggers a bad service by odometer calculation, it corrupts your cost per mile statistic. If you've got a pence per mile mileage contract on your tyres, for example, a bad odometer is going to cause you additional problems. So let's think about this. Grab a single data point from your telematics provider or your vehicle, bring that into your fleet solution to have an accurate, up-to-date mileage at any point in time. Maybe it's a daily, maybe it's more frequent than that. We've then got a really good starting point for that detail. We've actually had customers that, and some of you may be in the same boat, that they send their vehicles out on the road, the driver goes and fills up, and there's an expectation that they use the fuel card and they enter a mileage. How many times does the driver put 0 or 99999? We have clients who completely ignore the information presented by the driver, instead use the odometer transaction based on the telematics device, because there's a conditioned engine off event at the date and the time of the fuel transaction. So let's use that odometer to correctly feed the updated odometer into the system. So again, removing exception management, not having to fiddle through lots of paperwork and try and find a correct odometer. Let's use the data and rationalize it through. Thinking about the next one here, engine fault codes. Now, I've discussed this before. If we talk about the volume of data that is available from telematics and connected vehicles, if we assume there's 64,000 plus data points, what we want to make sure is the data that we're getting is pulled in to the right format. So I get an engine oil low warning light, and I'm aware that certain plug-in devices and certain telematics devices, they actually report these fault codes before the dashboard warning light comes on. I've heard that there's 7 or 8 different internal pings before it becomes a dashboard warning light. Once it becomes a dashboard warning light, of course, the driver should be reporting this. But if we can get the preconditioned information and says, okay, I've got a dashboard warning light, I've got a tyre pressure low warning light, I've got an engine oil degraded warning light, whatever this may be, if we can gather that information and, again, be structured about the questions you're asking here, we can get the information into the tool. Your fleet management system rationalizes this all together and then produces the alerts to the driver, to the transport manager, to your maintenance provider, saying this is deteriorating at X rate, we need to now get the vehicle in for its maintenance, get the cam belt changed, change the transmission fluid, whatever that process may be. A third opportunity here, I've focused on fuel a little bit here. I have a report of a vehicle operating below its expected MPG. Now, I'm not suggesting we use the manufacturer's quoted MPG, because of course they will always overinflate them. So take your operational MPG target. Let's look at the information that is pulled into the system and highlight the vehicles that are performing below that metric. Talking about connecting those data points, if we can see a vehicle that is performing lower than its expected MPG, this is tied into an engine oil low warning or pre-warning. This is also tied into a low tyre pressure warning. These three things are already drawing a conclusion that there's drain on the engine because the tyre pressure is too low and the engine oil is too low. Let's rectify these individual issues and move these forward. So a connected result there is the driver's trained to be better, to check the tyre pressure before they do it, to check the warning lights. And again, we can bring in different examples of this. The telematics might also be providing the fact that we've had a driver who's sitting at engine idling. They're just sitting there at the side of the road with their engine on. So engine running, low tyre pressure, bad driving. In terms of the actual profile and the risk of that driver, use the data, highlight the data points, put in the changes within your policies and your profiles to make better judgments in the future. So the next is, how do we do this? So how do we do it? How do we get control of this data? So we'll start off firstly with the what. I mentioned this in an earlier slide. It is crucial for you to have a good understanding of the problem you're trying to solve or the information you want to gather. If you go into this with no goal, you're just going to end up with lots and lots of noise and lots of data that you're still not able to manage. So think about the specifics of the information you want to gather, the problem you're trying to solve, and document this. This could be, I want to get up-to-date odometers, an easy fix. I want to reduce my cost per mile. I want to increase my MPG. I want to reduce my vehicle downtime. So think about the problem you're trying to solve. The next thing is the where. And again, we've talked about this in the previous slides. The where is super important. For me to be able to find the answers to my problems, I need to know where the data exists. So, is the data coming from my lease company, my maintenance provider, my fuel card company, my telematics company? Is it coming from the driver themselves? So, understand what systems you already have, who your vendors are, and the data that each of those particular systems and solutions hold. Now, I have mentioned external vendors. So external vendors being your fuel card companies, your telematics. It could be this data is also coming from your internal systems. This could be information coming from your ERP systems. It could be coming from your finance systems, your traffic systems and solutions. Again, data around the job the vehicle is doing and the people that are in your vehicles. So don't just think external, also think internal. We can also take these data feeds from your governmental authorities. So thinking about driver license checking from the DVLA, MOT and tax information are coming from DVSA, or again, other bodies that are available. They have open APIs available for this now. The third point here is how. So this is where we get slightly technical. Having a good understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. Perfect. Document it. Get it written out. Secondly, where are we getting it from? We've got a list of the data providers, the solutions that hold this data. The third question is, how do we consolidate and access all this information together? Now, I did call this out earlier on. Most software solutions nowadays will have API endpoints that people can reach to. It's much more common now to have computer connectivity rather than this being file-based information. So reach out to your vendors, excuse me, and again, think about these as internal and external data providers, and see what API endpoints and what technical documentation is available for you to reach the data points that you need. If your data provider still relies on a file, that file might be a file that you get emailed. It may be sort of a halfway house, a file that gets hosted in an online storage solution, a Dropbox, an FTP site, a Google Drive, that again, we can reach into and consume that data into the system. The final point on there, and I called it out earlier on the slide, is having a solution in place, and I will call out fleet management software because all this data is fleet related. Have a comprehensive solution that once it's consumed that data can deal with and manage that data. The final point here is when. So we talked about the what, the where, the how, and the when. The when is topic specific. And what I mean by this is think about how important the data is to reach your decision-making process. If we think about a fuel card integration, it's probably okay to have a monthly file transfer from your fuel card vendor, because this is largely going to be the cost and the analysis because we're getting the odometers from elsewhere. So an integration from a fuel vendor, probably monthly file-based. If we think about the telematics piece, this wants to be much more frequent. We don't want to wait a month before we get a telematics integration for two really good reasons. Number one, remember, connected vehicle, 25 gigabytes of data every hour. If we're waiting for 100 vehicles for 30 days, it's such a large quantity of data, you're just going to get lost in the noise. Plus, if the data point you're trying to rectify is including engine overheats, engine oil lows, tyre pressure monitors, we want to know about this as quickly as we can. So the integration wants to be much more frequent. This is maybe a 10 or 15 minute integration that pings, fires the data, and reports that information to you on a much more frequent basis. So we now have that information in a tool. We've worked out who our vendors are. We've worked out what integration capability they have. We've got a solution that's consolidated and implementing that information and highlighting the exceptions to you. What do we do next? Well, this is all down to your personal preference, and a lot of it is going to be based on the data that you're actually transacting. So what I'm talking about here is things like a report. So a report could be anything. You go into your system and say, I want to know about all the engine warning lights on in the past 30 days. Great, run a report. Simple. So that's an ad hoc exception-based report. We talked earlier about the automation piece, standardizing and automating. So if we have a specific rule that if I get this engine fault transaction, I don't want to sit and wait for this. I want the system to import it. I want the system to rationalize it. I want the system to then deliver a notification to a person or persons that this important transaction has taken place. So reporting, ad hoc, very simple. I've gone on to that notification piece. So that notification piece there would be as described. It's something that's important, it's pertinent. I want to be told about this rather than asking for it. I've got KPIs on here. I think if you look at any system nowadays, and I've looked around the show today, and everybody's got a screen which has got a dashboard. Dashboards are great. Have useful exception management dashboards that show in big red numbers the problems you've got. Red, amber, greens, really simple. Red numbers, problem, click through, get to the data. Green numbers, maybe standardize a report to push that information out to make sure we're correcting this later on down the line. And the final one I've got here is an interface. Now, we've talked a lot today. When I say we, of course, I mean me. We've talked about the information coming into the solution. You've got a data provider that we're consuming data from. It's just as likely we might have information we need to push out of the fleet system. Let's take an example. I've got a driver that the telematics is reporting there was a high-risk driver. They've got lots of harsh brakings, harsh accelerations, they've got engine idling, they've got risk points in terms of their telematics. The vehicles they're driving, their MPG is low. You know that you're getting these individual warnings. Great having it in the fleet system, but if the person that's going to deal with that process is in HR, then let's create that integration to your HR solution to say we've got a driver that needs additional training. We've got a driver that's operating at this risk. If this person is left on the road, these are the problems we're going to experience. So this again could be a KPI, it could be a report, it could be a notification, or where appropriate, it's an integration back to another system. We've got this integration already set up with Geotab, in fact. So the Geotab manages the downstream process, and then what we do in our system is the allocation of the vehicle happens within FleetWave, and then that allocation information gets pushed back out to Geotab to line up the cost centers and the allocation detail as we see there. So think about inbound and outbound communications. So, we've reached the end of our presentation, or at least the last page. We've talked about a lot of data here, so let's summarise where we go with this. First things first, in terms of refining your oil, we need to closely and precisely define which data points you need. We need to research how we can get to that information. And once we've got that integration set up, we need to define what to do with that data. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for listening.